What's up, guys? Oh my god, that was so lame. Anyway, welcome to the NFL Live Before Lock show. Talking about tonight's Bills versus Titans game. I'm Alex Baker, joined today by Kyle Dvorchak, and of course, we're part of Awesemo.com. Kyle, how are you doing today?
Yeah, good. It's I think maybe back-to-back shows for us, or maybe there's been one in between where we were kind of rushing to get the CSVs uploaded right before lock, or at least before we hopped on live before lock, to be specific, because this is it's a spicy one from the Bill side, and it's kind of a comically funny one from the Titan side. At least theirs could have been predicted. No Zach Moss, no John Brown. A fairly surprising outcome for those guys. So a lot to talk about for the show.
I know they didn't make it easy on us today in the fantasy, but hopefully we get a little bit of dead money and people who didn't have time to swap off Zach Moss or swap off John Brown. Sucks because John Brown, he's looking like a pretty good option, but
I know
it's behind us. Also for the tight ends, Adam Humphries is out, Corey Davis is out, and Michael Pruitt on the COVID list, as well as some other guys on the defensive end, I'm sure. But let's talk a little bit about the last few Showdown slates. So what have you been seeing in Showdown these past few ones?
So I guess the one thing I'd want to key in on, and I think we saw it a decent amount on the last Showdown, Chargers versus New Orleans, is that we usually come in here and talk, and I'm just talking up all these skill position players at flex, because most quarterbacks, if they're going to have a good game, generally throw multiple touchdowns or get their receiver to a 100-yard bonus, a lot of catches. But it is important to pick your spots with these guys, because we saw Justin Herbert was very close. I don't think he ended up being the optimal captain play, but he was very close. If that last touchdown goes to a different player, he's easily the optimal captain play, or say if he rushes in a touchdown or something. There were a lot of outs for Justin Herbert to end up being the optimal captain. And I think this night specifically, that should be in the back of our minds, because I usually come in and talk on about a receiver hitting a 100-yard bonus, Derrick Henry doing his King Henry thing and going for 150 on 35 carries or whatever. But this does set up for a slate where you really do have to consider quarterbacks at the captain spot. So I think that's something that's interesting. I think Cam Newton was the optimal captain. We had Patrick Mahomes do it previously, and Justin Herbert almost got there, and he certainly didn't kill you by playing him at captain. So definitely something that really applies to tonight's slate specifically.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Josh Allen has a ton of rushing upside, and he could easily get those few extra points on the ground that maybe Herbert didn't get that could have made him the top scoring player. So that's going to be huge tonight. In general, the quarterbacks are priced up a little bit too much relative to their chance of being the top scoring player. I'm right now updating the top Showdown plays tool so that you guys can have an idea of what percentages I'm projecting for each player to be the top scoring. I'll try to give you guys some updates as soon as that is done. And Showdown ownership's running too to account for some of these inactives. A little bit surprising. We're all scrambling, but it's a fun slate. The quarterback at captain today. I assume you'd be much more interested in Josh Allen than Ryan Tannehill. Those are with Tannehill. He, first of all, it's a run first team, and second of all, he doesn't run that much himself. So is it mostly Josh Allen at quarterback you're considering?
Yeah, I do think Tannehill on a different slate would be interesting, because he isn't a zero. He's not Drew Brees as a rusher. He does have a little bit of scramble potential, but really you hit on it on why I just can't bring myself to really be excited about Tannehill. They just want to run the ball. They're I believe, sixth most run heavy team in the NFL right now. Certainly it does help that they have been, I think they're 3-0 because they didn't play one game. So that helps. You can be more run heavy when you're winning. But I think that's just their philosophy. And we've seen it last year. We're going to see it again this year, I assume. So if they were even modestly, in the middle in terms of pass run, I would say Ryan Tannehill, who can throw random touchdowns to an Anthony Berkshire, can throw to a lot of different guys, would be interesting. But yeah, their run first philosophy and the alternatives that you have to pass up when you select Ryan Tannehill at captain, not tonight. I would say a different slate. Maybe I'd be different, in the right context. This isn't the right context.
Yeah, definitely. And the quarterback captains are usually somewhat popular too. Now, this is really specific to DraftKings, because on FanDuel, quarterbacks just score more relative to skill position players. So last night, Herbert was the big money maker on FanDuel. Yeah. So important to know the site. What's the best strategy for the site that you're building each lineup for? Let's break down the slate a little bit. First of all, guys, we need you guys to click the like button. it's a tough situation reacting to all these inactives. We're doing our best, so make sure to give us some moral support and click the thumbs up. Also, all of the information on Awesemo.com for Showdown is available with the Express package. That's only $3.95 a week for the main slice. You also get the big board. You get the lineup builder, a really underrated tool, and a lot more. So make sure to check out the Express package. Now let's start with Tennessee. They obviously missed a game. We're in danger of missing another game due to that breaking of the rules with COVID. But here we are. It's Tuesday night. We have football. You got to love that. So what are you making of how COVID has affected this team for tonight's slate?
Yeah, this is maybe probably the weirdest team on a Showdown slate we'll see all year because of this. Like you said, I think you named them all. I think no Mike Pruitt, who's a number 3 tight end, but this is a team that doesn't run, like they actually run a certain amount of 3 tight end sets, which is quite rare. So no Mike Pruitt. I believe Jeff Swaim steps in for him. That's a few snaps. It's not nothing. And we've seen Mike Pruitt hit before. So he's probably the guy who'd step up. We could also just see a lot of Anthony Firkser as the number 2 tight end. In terms of the receivers, like they are just trotting out these no-name guys. It is, I believe the starting set projects to be Westbrook in the slot, AJ Brown at X, and Kari Blazingham. Is that how you say it? Blasingame. Or not Blasing, Khalif Raymond. The K names trip me up. Khalif Raymond on the other side. And I will point out, Khalif Raymond not getting a ton of work because, he's Khalif Raymond, but he has like a 24 ADOT. And that is certainly skewed by a tiny sample, but I think he actually leads the team in air yards right now because they haven't had AJ Brown all year, and you have a 24 ADOT guy. And although that probably won't sustain itself, Khalif Raymond with, even if you bump it down to 15, in the range of 15 to 18 ADOT, all he needs is 1 or 2 targets to really have a big game. Like we saw Mike Williams get there on 5 catches. I don't know if that is the exact projection that you go 2 touchdowns on Khalif Raymond. But ADOT is somewhat tied to the receiver. I don't think it's completely tied to the receiver, but you do see receivers generally run similar routes regardless of like who their quarterback is or if they change teams. So I am kind of interested in his big play potential. Outside of that, I think they probably had Cody Hollister activated off the practice squad, I believe. These guys, I think the interesting thing is really going to be how do you play the cheap guys? Because the optimizers are going to love Nick Westbrook and Firkser. They're going to love those 2 guys. If you're playing in the biggest tournaments, do you just pivot to a Cody Hollister? Because we don't know what's going to happen. Like I think Lofty was talking about this. He's like, I just, who cares? Who cares what's going to happen? Not because we can't, we shouldn't be trying to figure out what's going to happen, but we should probably look more to ownership. If someone like Firkser is going to be massively owned, do we really know he's going to get that much more run over the number 4 receiver? Do we even know who the number 3 receiver is? So I think maybe that's the edge to exploit tonight, or one of the few edges is that we just don't know what's going to happen, but we do have some lean at what ownership should look like. So that's probably where I would look to exploit this slate, is just people overvalue what they think they know. And do we actually know anything with this team that we didn't see last week? We haven't seen some of these receivers like all year.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned a lot of great points there with, with Tennessee, a lot of their regulars are out. We're going to see some guys that you've never heard of play. And some of those would be Cody Hollister. Khalif Raymond is someone that's been playing more. I think he's actually like a pretty solid option no matter what lineup you're building, because he's been on the field. Tennessee is a team that, because they run first, when they throw, a lot of times it's pretty deep. And Ryan Tannehill had amazing efficiency last year just because when you don't rely on short passes, that allows you, when you do pass, to really be effective. So I think that Khalif Raymond, really solid player that the only problem, as you mentioned, is the high ADOT. While it's good for getting air yards, it's not great for getting a lot of targets throughout a game. Now, Nick Westbrook, he's played a little bit this year. So I think it is reasonable to assume that he'll be on the field today. Whereas Cody Hollister, he played a couple snaps like week 1.
Yeah.
It's just like they only have 4 wide receivers, so I think he'll play a little bit too. But Firkser is actually the guy I'm kind of leaning to as a pure punt because over the first 3 games, he averaged 38% of the snaps. Now you throw out Michael Pruitt, replace him with Jeff Swaim. Maybe Ferkser sees a few extra routes, and he's really, really cheap. So for cash games, I think he makes sense. For tournaments, yeah, it's kind of like a pretty risky option, but I think somewhat solid. So let's talk about the running backs here. I mean, Derrick Henry is obviously always a top option, especially a captain, given that the running back scoring is really independently related to passing. And he, in my top players tool, has a 15% chance of being the top scoring player, a little bit lower than I was expecting here. So what are you making of Tennessee running the ball tonight? And how do you like Henry at captain?
Yeah, I think Henry is probably one of the better, I don't know about the best, but one of the better options at captain, especially when you look at ownership. You talked about quarterbacks as much as obviously quarterbacks project for the most points. And we do have, a ton of great $200 plays. So it's kind of easy to get them there. Like Derrick Henry, if they're going to give him 25 plus, I think he's averaging 25.5 carries per game, and he's not a non-factor as a receiver, 1.7 receptions. It's not great. But this team just wants to commit to the run. So I think even if they're at a modest deficit now, if they're down 14 or more points, maybe you do see them skew more pass heavy than usual. But if they're even close in this game, I think Derrick Henry just, as expected, gets a ton of work. I think relative to the quarterbacks in this game, maybe there's some value in getting him into the captain spot. I don't see Durianton Evans taking a ton of work. He's certainly worth a shot as a punt play, especially if you maybe go with a bit of a pivot. You don't play one of the $200 plays and you bump up to Durianton Evans. But that's just a tournament strategy play. It's not like I love Durianton Evans getting a ton of work. I just think he's an interesting guy because Derrick Henry, as much as we see him get a ton of work, can't play 100% of the snaps, and he can't get or probably can't get every single backfield touch. So Evans is interesting, but obviously Derrick Henry just going to get the ball a ton. And I don't think it's entirely based on game script. I think unless they're losing a lot, we do see a ton of Derrick Henry.
For sure, yeah. I mean, Tennessee loves to run the ball. I don't think there's any situation where they're going to phase out their number one option. So I think Henry is certainly solid, even though Tennessee usually a favorite in their games, a little bit of an underdog tonight. Durianton Evans, I agree, kind of a guy that stands out as maybe a deep flyer in a tournament where you need something to break your way, like Tennessee to just dominate this game, and then they're giving him garbage time work or some sort of reason why Derrick Henry is removed from the game early. Certainly a possibility. We see it every week in the NFL, so that is not a bad way to go. And then let's see. I'm trying to Kyrie Blasingame, he's out due to COVID, I believe.
Yes.
So yeah, that's about all we got there. Any deep flyers that on this team? I mean, I know you mentioned Cody Hollister. Maybe the guys that could win you the several $100,000 payoff for $10. You see any on this team?
Yeah, I would say if you're playing in the largest of largest field tournaments, you maybe have to consider playing Hollister or Jeff Swaim, who, like I said, they play some 3 tight end. I think it was either this year or late last year we saw, actually, I think it was this year that Mike Coyle Pruitt scored a touchdown. That was the week I was on Ferkser, and that really irked me in the name of Ferkser. So I think maybe Jeff Swaim just gets on the field enough to where 1 or 2 catches, like it's not impossible that he outproduces the other $200 guys, and touchdowns are so variant that we could very well see a Jeff Swaim touchdown. I don't think it's a lock. I definitely would say in your cash games, you're not looking to him over the other $200 plays. But we're talking about trying to not chop that tournament, not split it with 100 other lineups, 200 other lineups, whatever it is. These are the pivots you probably have to make, and they definitely lower your projection, but they probably increase your expected value. So I think Swaim and Hollister are both interesting plays just in the realm of a pivot off of the obviously good but well-owned plays.
Yeah, I like it. I think Hollister, he's probably going to see the field a decent amount, being the wide receiver 4. And I think he hasn't scored any fantasy points this year so far, so maybe that won't really attract any attention to him on the draft screen. Or like a guy like Cleve Raymond, who I think people don't really know who he is either, but he has a fantasy score of 5.8 on the year. That's not great, but maybe it will attract a little bit more love. Nick Westbrook also 0 on the year, so it could be the new. I can't remember who that guy was on the Bucks that hadn't scored.
The guy on the Bucks who was the $200 play, who's the number 4 receiver. That was Tyler Johnson, I assume.
Tyler Johnson, that's right.
I love Tyler Johnson.
So tonight's Tyler Johnson. It could be Nick Westbrook. You can do whatever you want with that information. But so Tennessee, I think there's some opportunities here to pick some guys we wouldn't normally take because of the COVID players that are out. So pretty interesting pieces here. Now let's talk about No House Advantage real quick. They're our presenting sponsor. If you like betting props, you should check out No House Advantage because you don't have to bet against the house. You can bet against some Joe Schmoes in DFS style tournaments. They can be a lot easier to beat than the house. So you pick 5 props just like you build a lineup, and I have my projections up on the site for that. So make sure to check it out. Promo code Awesemo, you get $20 free, and you can buy some more entries with that. So I never mind a little bit of extra money. Let's talk a little bit about props. So what's one No House Advantage you like, and then what is one that you like at a sports book?
So I was really interested I was excited to bet the under on Devin Singletary touchdowns because Zach Moss is running at the goal line back. We didn't see that last week. I don't think TJ Yeldon got a single touch last week. He played like 8 snaps in the week before that. He got a handful of carries, maybe like one of them was in the red zone. But I guess we can nix that with Zach Moss out. And with the other injury, and I'll have to see if they have, have they updated any of their props? Because we had some edge on Cole Beasley over receptions already, and now we have John Brown out. I would imagine even if they adjust it up, it probably doesn't end up being enough. I don't think he plays the same role as John Brown necessarily, but does Gabriel Davis step in and take over the entirety of John Brown's role? I'm not sure we see that. So I think Cole Beasley, I wasn't super excited. I think you kind of dropped that nugget at the top of the show that we were excited about John Brown. I have to start thinking about getting excited about, at least especially in terms of the player props market. Cole Beasley over receptions, and even his receiving yards are starting to look more enticing now that John Brown is out.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that with Cole Beasley, we couldn't really expect a huge workload with John Brown in because Gabriel Davis was starting to be one of their guys that was part of the main rotation, and that was taking away from Cole Beasley's snaps. Now that John Brown is out, there's plenty of snaps to go around. I think we'll see more Cole Beasley and more Gabriel Davis, so that's something I'm pretty excited about. As far as No House Advantage, mine would be just betting the over on one of the 2 quarterbacks to throw interceptions because they don't have juice on these props. The odds that a quarterback throws an interception are usually a lot higher than they don't, except in rare cases. So I think that the Josh Allen over 0.5 interceptions looks good. Now in the sports books, honestly, I thought the props looked pretty tough today. I didn't see any that really jumped out at me. And sometimes the better part of betting is discretion. So I might just take the money I was going to put in props, put it back into DFS night. Hope there's some dead money in these tournaments from all the inactives. So actually, I didn't bet any props tonight. A little bit disappointing because I had a lot of fun on Sunday betting them. But let's talk about Buffalo. Now, with Zach Moss inactive, obviously that bolsters Devin Singletary a lot. We've been seeing him be a workhorse back in the absence of Zach Moss. So do you expect that to continue tonight, and how do you value Singletary?
Yeah, I was super excited to fade Devin Singletary before this Zach Moss news because we saw, I won't belabor it too much because it doesn't matter at this point, but Zach Moss was operating as, some role as a pass catcher and significantly as a goal line back. Now I think between Josh Allen and Devin Singletary, that's their goal line back. It's not entirely Devin Singletary. We have seen Josh Allen used as like a pseudo goal line back in the past. But yeah, Devin Singletary rocketed upwards for me once I found out that Zach Moss was out because I wasn't too interested. I thought Zach Moss would play a role. TJ Yeldon just isn't a Zach Moss replacement. He didn't get any work last week. He got a very small amount of work the week before. I think, it's probably just the Devin Singletary show. I think this took him from a place where I really was excited to fade him. So now I'm actually over the field on him at captain because if you can project a running back to see the vast majority of both the carries and the targets out of the backfield, that makes a ton of sense to put him in at captain, not only because the work is there, but it's work that he doesn't share with anyone else, as we've talked about a lot on this show. So Devin Singletary kind of flying up boards for me. One of the biggest adjustments, actually almost certainly the biggest adjustment I made once we found out that Zach Moss was out was just take the carries and run with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Devin Singletary is pretty hard to not love tonight. I mean, Zach Moss was questionable, so I can't remember if the Singletary pricing is real low, but I was honestly surprised at how high a projection he got when I put all the info in with Zach Moss out. But he hasn't been ceding very much work to TJ Yeldon, even though Yeldon has kind of that reputation as a pass catching back. It hasn't really made a difference. So I think Singletary is a top play tonight. So that's pretty cool that we got that news an hour before lock or hour and a half before lock, because maybe not everyone will have adjusted to that. So that's the nice thing about waiting until before lock to build these lineups. As far as the pass catchers, Stefan Diggs obviously has been crazy good this year. There was one game where he caught 2 touchdowns in a row. They're both cold back, and then he's still getting touchdowns in that game. I mean, the dude has been on fire. Buffalo's passing offense has been off the charts in efficiency, over 9 yards per attempt over the first few weeks. So, are you expecting that to continue? Or I mean, Tennessee's defense, although they have kind of a good reputation over the past year, they haven't been all that great at preventing efficiency in the pass and run. So what do you make of the Tennessee defense, and how does that affect your opinion of Josh Allen and Diggs?
Yeah, so for me, I don't know if we see this change a ton from Josh Allen, the fact that he's playing incredibly efficiently. Obviously, you expect this to regress at some point, but we see quarterbacks all the time go entire seasons without really regressing. It's just, it is what happens. Some players, I don't know if it's probably not as much getting hot as the stars align around them. It's been happening with Josh Allen. He's essentially number 3 in every single efficiency metric. I believe adjusted yards per attempt, touchdown rate, PFF passing grade. It has all been there. And I think maybe the passing grade is sort of important to focus in on because he's not just running hot in the sense of he's throwing an above average touchdown rate, which he absolutely is. He's also just playing well. As far as we can empirically say a player is playing well, he has been. So I don't like the Tennessee defense tonight. The only thing is I do think they're going to be relatively low owned. And as far as we talk about showdown slates, that's so much of what you're looking for is viable plays that are low owned. And we have seen Josh Allen be bad in the past. So in my, I don't know if you just want to call it film grinding or whatever, in my heart, I think Josh Allen is very good. But in terms of DFS strategy on a showdown slate, I don't hate getting some mix of Titans in just because anything can happen. And certainly it is possible that on a single game, Josh Allen looks like he did last year. So I think maybe Derrick Henry Titans stacks in the largest field tournaments are a bit interesting, maybe more so than people would consider. But yeah, I still, as a median projection, expect Josh Allen to have a good game. Now his target share should be condensed a little bit to less guys. Interestingly, I think he has 12 touchdowns, and he has thrown those touchdowns to 8 different guys. No guy has scored more than twice for this team. That's something we've talked about in the past when we're looking at captaining a quarterback. That is quite useful. Touchdowns are very random, but it is interesting to note that they get a lot of guys in the mix. So I don't want to overproject and say there's no way that Stefan Diggs scores 2 touchdowns. There's a way he scores 3. But it is interesting that he is both a rusher and a guy who spreads the ball around. That's what I think makes him so interesting at captain. In terms of the receivers, yeah, Stefan Diggs is absolutely balling out. And like you said, maybe running a little bit cold on those touchdowns. averaging over 100 yards per game on DraftKings specifically, quite useful for that 100-yard bonus. I think he's probably one of the better, I'd say he's probably the best receiver play in terms of the entire slate at captain, because I don't know, outside of A.J. Brown, I don't think any of these guys have incredible ceilings just in terms of the market share numbers. I believe it's 35 targets to just 24 for Cole Beasley, 23 for the non-existent John Brown. So, and I think if anyone were to take those deep down the field looks, it would be a mix of Gabriel Davis and Stefan Diggs, not really Cole Beasley. So the John Brown loss even improves his projection. I love Stefan Diggs. Okay, on Cole Beasley, I really like Gabriel Davis. I think he takes more of that work than we would expect. I just don't see Cole Beasley getting a huge bump because he is such a different player from John Brown when you look at where they play physically on the field, the ADOT. I think Gabriel Davis is probably, for his ownership and for his salary, I prefer him over Cole Beasley.
Yeah, Gabriel Davis, one stat that's really jumping out at me here. Cole Beasley, well, I mean, he has 24 targets. Gabriel Davis has 8 targets. But Gabriel Davis has played about 85% of the snaps as Cole Beasley. So, although last week that flipped where Cole Beasley played a lot less than Davis. So, I agree. Davis is more like a John Brown replacement. These guys will both be on the field a good amount. But I just... I'd be a little bit worried about fading Cole Beasley because he has been targeted 21% of the time when he's been on the field. And we got to think that he's going to be on the field more today with John Brown not seeing as many snaps. So that's how I'm looking at this. Now, we got a question in chat. Thank you for the super chat. That was from Aiden. Gabriel Davis or Cleve Raymond? So this is an interesting question because kind of similar players, both guys that we don't really usually get to play in fantasy, but tonight is a major exception. So do you have a strong lean between those two? Gabriel Davis and Cleve Raymond.
No, I don't have a particularly... I don't have a particularly strong lean between these two guys. I think for me, because we know how run heavy that Tennessee wants to be, like you said, those high ADOT targets are fun for fantasy and they're good for generating points and splashes, but it also does mean that he's probably not getting a ton of targets. Gabriel Davis stepping over for that John Brown role, if he ends up being not even a 1-for-1 replacement, but I don't know, 75% of that, I do think Gabriel Davis would be my preferred play, although I like both of these guys to a decent extent.
Nice. Yeah, so I think I'd have to go with Cleve Raymond. The Titans are a little bit more injured or lacking in wide receivers today than the Bills. I'm just worried that Gabriel Davis hasn't been getting targets when he's been on the field so far this year, and that is a major thing I look for. So I would go with Raymond personally. Okay, let's talk more about the Bills team here. So going down the list, Isaiah McKenzie is kind of a outside threat to be a decent option tonight. Dawson Knox, they're tight end 1, but they just don't use the tight ends in the pass game that much. Any love for McKenzie or Knox?
Yeah, McKenzie, I think he even picked up a carry or two in the past few weeks, which is maybe interesting in that sort of could play like the Curtis Samuel role where you have no one else in your backfield. They clearly don't want to use TJ Yeldon. Maybe that gives him an extra, 0.51 points or whatever. Worth noting, I don't hate him. I think he's just a differentiation play. I'd probably still look to the Titans for my $200 plays if I'm just playing in smaller tournaments or cash gains. Don't love him, but certainly you could definitely mix it up by getting McKenzie in there. Outside of that, the tight ends, man, our projections do not like the tight ends because, like you said, they just don't use their tight ends. The only way you're really getting a great performance out of one of them is a touchdown, and we know Josh Allen can throw touchdowns, so that's why I still have them in my player pool. But outside of that, yeah, I'm not really looking to the tight ends except for larger field tournaments because they're essentially both touchdown or bust plays. They need to be like 800 or 1,000 to really actually be good plays just based on their volume, which isn't great.
Yeah, so the touchdown or the tight end position, not that exciting on Buffalo. But Dawson Knox, yeah, it's like sometimes the touchdown or bust is all you need. So like we've seen it time and time again that some random dude will get a touchdown and that'll change the slate entirely. Now, Knox is a little bit too popular, I'm assuming, to really be that random guy. So how about Tyler Croft or Reggie Gilliam? I guess are those guys that maybe could sneak in the end zone?
Yeah, didn't Tyler Croft a few weeks ago had the double touchdown game, I believe, and Reggie Gilliam or whatever. That's like one of the few times where I actually saw just getting the touchdowns in my feed, and I didn't recognize the name. That is so rare for me, knowing almost you do this long enough and you know almost every player on the roster to an extent. I had never heard of him. So I think Tyler Croft is probably as deep as I go at tight end, but yeah, he could absolutely score. It's definitely possible we've seen him score this season. I don't think Dawson Knox is a player who's going to play, 100% of the snaps at tight end. Don't love either of these guys. But like you said, the ownership seems to indicate that people have some consideration for Dawson Knox. I think he can probably pivot off of tight end entirely or look to Tyler Croft. Not too excited about any of these guys, and I'm not really getting as deep as Gilliam.
Yeah, Gilliam is he's a long shot to even make the field probably. So. Yeah. Can't be too excited about that, but I know some people do like to throw in a guy that maybe no one's heard of. There's so many on this slate that it'll be fun to see who if someone can end up taking down this big payday. So we talked a lot about the players on the teams. Now let's talk about special teams and kicker, or defense and special teams and kicker. I saw some complaining in the chat that kicker has been on a run in these tournaments, and kickers have been winning people all the money. And I play kickers, so I don't have a problem with that. But how do you handle the kicker spot in Showdown?
Yeah, I think this is especially maybe a place you could go to kicker, because I think we're going to see a large number of lineups built with one or even two punt plays and just all of the studs. Going for a mix of guys who are in the middle of the pricing range could give you not a wildly unique build, but it definitely could be a different approach. And as long as I don't think the game total, I think the game total's come down since opening actually. So as long as we're not going to see teams just scoring at will in this game, you can definitely get to them. I think both kickers are fine. Obviously, I'm taking the favored kicker. It would be my preferred play. Not that much more expensive to get Tyler Bass, I believe. So I'm not huge on kickers, but I certainly think in the context of this slate, maybe it even makes a little more sense to essentially fade some of, or at least have lineups that fade some of these really cheap guys. And hopefully guys like Cole Beasley, Gabriel Davis, and kickers go off. And that's a way to get potentially unique, not incredibly unique, but it would be different to not really have much interest in a lot of good $200 plays.
Yeah. I think for kickers, I don't spend a ton of time digging into the kickers and performance, but one thing that's really important is coaching tendency. Do they go for it more in the red zone if they have one to go, or they kick it? And one thing I look at are the field goal props on different sites. They're projecting Tennessee to significantly outperform Buffalo in average field goals, so that would lead me to the Tennessee kicker. Honestly, I gotta look at my spreadsheet to figure out who this is. Gostkowski. So pretty solid name in fantasy. So both kickers are definitely in play. They are a lot lower variance than your average position. So you only really need them to get 10, 12 points, sneak in the optimal some nights. So there is a good chance of that happening. And I do try to measure that in my top Showdown plays tool. So I'm pulling that up. So Tyler Bass I have is a 19% chance of being one of the top 6 scoring players. And then Gostkowski, a 19% chance as well. So, yeah, I think if you're not playing kickers, when they're one of the top 6 scoring... this was the ownership. The ownership's 19%. The chance that they're one of the top 6 scoring is 6 and 8% for Bass and Gostkowski. So my bad there. So based on that, maybe the kickers are overowned. And if we've been seeing them in the optimals, maybe people have a bias towards that. That being said, it is higher than a lot of other comparable players like Gabriel Davis, who have a 5.6% chance, and Dawson Knox at 4%. It's just kickers are so much more consistent. So what about defense? The Bills' defense is projected for 9% ownership. Titans for 12%. We know both quarterbacks are good, but not great. So does that make you have some love for the defenses?
Yeah, so like typically I would be more interested in the favorite defense. Obviously, I want my defense to be on the winning side of the game. But this run-heavy approach from Tennessee does really limit, like I think it's interesting how it would limit potential for dropbacks, like potential for sacks, turnovers, because a lot of your defensive production is going to come, like especially you want a touchdown. Touchdowns are best to be served from sacks and from interceptions. So I think that's maybe a hindrance, but we do see like Ryan Tannehill play a bit of a volatile style. I don't think, as a guy who breaks the pocket a little bit, he could take some sacks. It really just depends on how the game goes. I especially think if the Bills get out to quite an early lead, that would force Ryan Tannehill to, like you would imagine, it would force him to just have to pass. I don't think, although the Vikings kind of buck this trend, they run so much even if they lose, which is incredible. Good on you, Vikings, for sticking to your principles. So I think it's interesting to see that if we do see the Bills get out to an early lead, you would expect the Titans to throw more. And that's a scenario where you really would want to be on the Bills defense. Outside of that, I don't love either of these ones. Maybe the Titans playing Josh Allen is good, but this year playing Josh Allen has not been good. So I think I actually prefer the kickers to the defenses on this slate. I think they probably have more of a chance of scoring, given that the total's reasonably high. I think it's just over 50. So not a ton of love for both defenses, but I still have them in my mix.
Yeah, it's kind of it's pretty tough to handle the defense position in fantasy showdown, and part of the reason why is because like they so rarely like score like a real amount of points, and I don't think today's game is really more likely to have that kind of upside either. So, but then again, like there are defensive touchdowns scored in about 1/3 of NFL football games. If one of them gets that sack, fumble, recovery, touchdown, that's 9 points on top of whatever else they got. So there is real upside. I do think maybe people, if they're just projecting or going off projections, they may undervalue the defense a little bit, but definitely not a super exciting option. Let's talk about favorite captains, how you start off your lineup. Top 3 captains on DraftKings, and then the top 3 MVPs on FanDuel.
Yeah, so on DraftKings right now, I have to check, but I believe my top 3 after I ran my last upload before we got on the show, my top 3 were Derrick Henry, I believe Josh Allen, and then Stefan Diggs in that order. I also do think that A.J. Brown was in the mix there, and I really like A.J. Brown, given that we saw last year how much of a tear he went on towards the end of the Ryan Tannehill. Like, they run a ton of play action, which actually is like a very efficient way to throw the ball. That was quite interesting. Ryan Tannehill not afraid to go downfield. So A.J. Brown, 4th, but I still like him. Although Devin Singletary did bump up as well. I think the struggle is going to be between, do you go with Bills receivers or, receiver, it's really mostly Diggs for me, or Devin Singletary. So my top 4 is kind of tight. Then there's a bit of a gap to A.J. Brown. And then at MVP on FanDuel, Josh Allen probably pretty clearly number 1, although you could put Derrick Henry in that conversation as well. And then I would say at number 3, I actually think Devin Singletary would be my preferred number 3, although you could definitely make the argument for Ryan Tannehill. I guess that's my question for you is, where do you fall on the lesser of the quarterbacks versus, I guess, the lesser of the running backs on FanDuel MVP specifically?
Yeah, so I on FanDuel, I mean, I think that Singletary is a really solid option. So is Derrick Henry. It's really hard to really differentiate between the two, even though Derrick Henry is typically the better fantasy player. Like, a lot of that has been because of workload. The Bills' offense is stronger than Tennessee's offense. So I think Singletary and Henry, like, both really excellent options at FanDuel MVP. And I might even consider more running back MVP today than I normally would, because I do like these options a good amount. Of course, the quarterbacks do have a big advantage on FanDuel. So Josh Allen stands out as you said, the best option. And then wide receivers probably have the biggest disadvantage on FanDuel. So maybe that takes Diggs out of consideration a little bit. And I think that given that he's been on such a hot streak with touchdowns, we do know that touchdowns are a lot harder to come by for receivers. So maybe that would make me lean more towards Singletary and Henry, in addition to the quarterbacks who on FanDuel usually have the inside track to being the highest scoring players. So, let's talk a little bit about the overall lineup construction, like maybe some rules you would set in your lineups. One that I like to do is that if I have more than two or more receivers from the same lineup, obviously I need the quarterback. If they're in the flex, maybe consider the quarterback a captain a little bit more. Just so working in correlations like that into your lineups is a big help in Showdown. So what are you looking at tonight as far as the correlations?
Yeah, so I had one that maybe people wouldn't be on because, yeah, I think generally when you have like quarterback at captain, I think this slate is kind of interesting because we could have Josh Allen throw 2 touchdowns to one guy and then have a rushing touchdown, which could make him the optimal captain, and that only elevates one. If you have like a guy like Drew Brees, I'm assuming you're probably playing at a minimum 2 flex guys. I still think for me, I am going with minimum 2 pass catching options on Buffalo when Allen is a captain for me. And the interesting one I had was I actually boosted whenever I have Derrick Henry at captain. I boosted the defense just because I wanted to get a little bit more ownership of that specific correlation, because that probably would be the scenario. And that would be the scenario where we see a 30 carry game from Derrick Henry as they manage to get out to a lead, which isn't projected by Vegas, but this isn't like a massive gulf of a spread. We certainly could see them get out to a lead. So I boosted him. Outside of that, it was just the typical, if quarterback is in my flex, I have a min 1 of his pass catchers. The only thing that I think maybe could throw a wrench in that is that you could very well have, like, if Ryan Tannehill throws 2 or 3 passes to Anthony Firkser, that doesn't necessarily do a ton for Ryan Tannehill, but it does do a lot for Anthony Firkser because he's so cheap. So does that throw a wrench into things at all for you, where you could have multiple pass catchers from Tennessee make the optimal lineup just because of their, essentially mispricing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for that to happen, basically you're looking at a situation where the highest priced guys all put up a ton of points, and you just need them all in your lineup to cash. We saw that a lot in NBA where LeBron, Jimmy Butler, and Anthony Davis would all be in the optimal, and that just forces in a bunch of really, really cheap guys. And that is one way to build a lineup that is really effective, in my opinion, because it's so much more likely to happen that like the top players in a game will be the highest scoring, and you're going to need them. Like, it almost is like silly to say because it's so obvious, but like, yeah, if you can cram in like Derrick Henry and Singletary and Diggs onto one lineup, then that does make it so, like, regardless of how good the other guys do, it gives you a pretty good path to victory. So that's something I'm looking at. Today is interesting because we got so many really cheap options. I mean, we got Firkser. He's someone that, let me check his price. He's only 200 on DraftKings. Averages 3.7 fantasy points a game so far this year. That's not good, but for 200, that's probably like insane value. So who are the cheapies that you're looking at if maybe you want to cram in studs into your lineup?
Yeah, I think if you're just looking at like the best 200 plays, it's clearly Firkser and Nick. I almost call him there's a Saints beat reporter. It's really good. Nick Westbrook. Nick Underhill's a Saints reporter. Nick Westbrook and Anthony Firkser are clearly the guys. And interestingly, Anthony Firkser is in play at 200 on any given slate. Not this unique slate where we have no Titans receivers available. They only bring in 4 guys, and their third tight end, who does get some run, not available. He's totally in play because of how much they run 2 tight end at 200 on your normal Titan slate. So now we have a Titan slate where they don't have their full core of receivers. They don't have their number 3 tight end. They're subbing in someone else at number 3 tight end. And they also don't have their fullback, Blasingham, who we could see the tight ends work in essentially a pseudo fullback. So I do think Firkser for me is probably the guy. Nick Underwood coming in as the number 2 guy for me. Westbrook, I keep calling him Underwood. Nick Westbrook coming in as just Saints reporter, who's a good Saints reporter. His name sticks in my head. Nick Westbrook coming in as my second option, although I think you can flip a coin between those 2 guys. Is it better to be the number 2 tight end on a team that runs a lot of 2 tight end, or the number 3 receiver on a team that doesn't pass a lot regardless for both of these guys? So I think it's toss-up. I'm going to go with Ferkser, although it's close. I'm really only looking to Hollister or Isaiah McKenzie, Andre Roberts as just pure pivots because Ferkser and Nick both have great projections.
Yeah, I have to agree that Ferkser, even in a normal slate, he would be like a pretty decent play. And now with, I guess maybe today's slate, because there's such a number of players at 200 that maybe like in tournaments you might want to fade him, but he's my cash guy, Ferkser tonight. So someone that I think is really underpriced. Then Nick Westbrook as well, like put up 0 points, so I don't expect him to be popular on tonight's slate, but he has a really good likelihood of being out on the field a lot just because he's the next man up. So that often blows up in our face in fantasy, but there is a decent chance of that working out tonight. We got 13 minutes left until lock. One thing I just realized, so if any of you guys put this Monday to Tuesday slate, make sure to make the late swaps. If I forget, I will have a ton of John Brown, so that would be a pretty big bummer. But so also in season line, make sure to swap off John Brown and Zach Moss. So we got 12 minutes left. So what kind of game script do you think everyone's expecting in this game? And then what would be our contrarian way that it could go that people wouldn't see coming?
Yeah, so I think people would probably expect the Vegas line of 3.5 to be fairly accurate, or maybe it's somewhere around there. I think it's probably Bills favored. People are expecting them to, frankly, roll. And I think there are either two ways I would play this, is that they really just go all out. The Bills absolutely crush. Or on the other side, I'm going to have a decent amount of lineups that are built on the premise of, the Bills just not quite showing up, or just, anything can happen. I don't want to disrespect the Bills. Just the fact that anything can happen. We literally saw the Las Vegas Raiders beat the Chiefs. If you don't think anything can happen, I just don't know what to tell you. You cannot be helped at this point. So I do have a decent amount of lineups that are quite Titans heavy, specifically on the running game with Derrick Henry. I think he's one of the better captain plays because he controls so much of his offense, like we talked about, their necessity or their tendency to be incredibly run heavy. And then on top of that, he doesn't cede almost any work to his backup. So a lot of Derrick Henry and captain. I don't think that rules me out from playing Bills. I don't think the only scenario that he plays well is in a Titans victory, but I do think that would kind of surprise people. So I think there are two scenarios. One where this Titans team comes out missing some of their players, basically on a horrible schedule for a team, the extra time off, but doesn't really mean anything when you're hardly getting in any practices, and that really hinders them. I have no clue though. And you would think that if anyone had a sharp lean that was the case, it would be priced into their odds. You're not going to get, guys, I think this isn't good for the Titans. I'm going to go bet the Bills. Vegas knows that this is happening. So I think the line's accurate, but it is interesting to think that it just could happen that the Bills come out and roll. So I like either some real heavy Bills onslaughts because they also spread the ball out a lot. You could get some touchdowns from the cheap guys, or going the other direction specifically. I just don't want to play this as I'm probably not doing a ton of 3-3 tonight, I guess is what I'm coming down on. I'm either going with some contrarian, Derrick Henry stacks, or I guess call them Titans, but the Tennessee Derrick Henrys as far as I'm concerned, or going onslaught and just that for whatever reason, the Titans come out in this time off and time without practice really hinders them. So probably just maybe that's normal for me, but not trying to middle it with these 3-3 as much that I think it'll be contrarian to go either Titans heavy or Bills heavy. I just don't think the middle is where you want to be at because you're probably chopping.
Yeah, I think that's a smart idea you got, because you got two teams where there's so many really great fantasy options that you want to get in your lineup. I mean, Diggs, you got Josh Allen, Derrick Henry, and to a lesser extent Singletary and some other guys. But it's going to be hard for people to really rewire their brain to come up with a lineup that stacks up one of the two teams, because that means you're fading so many good options from the other ones. So I think that could be a really interesting way to go tonight, is just build that 5-1 stack. You obviously don't have as strong plays overall if you do that, but it should be a pretty unique way to construct your lineup. So The sacking, always important, especially in one-game slates. So that's something we're gonna. One thing that I want to get your opinion on is I kind of think defenses are getting more and more contrarian by the day. We just haven't seen them do very much this season. It hasn't been like last season where the Patriots won people money at captain like 3 straight slates.
Oh,
yeah, I know. Like that was the biggest pain in the butt because everyone started picking them, and like they kept performing. And well, I mean, obviously we knew that was a fluke, but I also think it's a fluke that defense has been doing like next to nothing. I really feel like the defense has a pretty big upside no matter who is playing, and I'm willing to take some shots at maybe a defense captain because I just feel like no one's doing it these days. And today, with 2 teams that are pretty solid offensively, I think that either putting a defense in the flex or at captain could be under the radar. So maybe you can talk me off of it, man. What do you think of defense at captain or just being overweight on defense in general?
Yeah, I do think, like you said, like defenses aren't like smashing plays or anything, but I have to imagine after weeks and weeks and weeks of just offenses running roughshod over these defenses, that is going to lower the ownership projections. And you read the ownership projections out earlier for our defenses, and I was a bit surprised how low they were. And in the context of this season, sure, it has made sense. But like you said, it also at one point, made sense to keep playing New England at captain, but none of these things can last. I think at some point we will see defenses perform better than they have to this point. Maybe they're not as good as they were last year, but I do think it's a bit of an outlier, quite how much scoring we've seen. So I do like that. For me, it feels a little scary, but I'm going to go with the underdog Titans as my defense because I like 4 games of incredible play from Josh Allen. Don't take that away from him. But we do have fairly strong priors on him of 2 seasons of NFL data and then data going back to his time at Wyoming that he does make some incredible mistakes. I mean, the pitch to Dawson Knox in the playoffs comes to mind as just a classic, an absolute masterpiece in Josh Allen play. And he hasn't been making mistakes to the extent that he has before, but that can flip so much in one game. And I don't like running my defense too much into the Titans just because they don't give you as many like sack and interception opportunities. So I actually have the Titans as my preferred defense, not because I think they're like outright a better play, but I think their upside ends up being more. So I do like the Titans defense specifically. Do you sound like you're in on defenses like on the board essentially. Is there any reason, talk me into the Bills a little bit if you have Bills interest? Because I like Titans. I just think they have a lot of upside facing Josh Allen. Of course, the downside is catastrophic, but I don't really care about downside in my tournament builds.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Titans defense does make more sense because, yeah, I mean, Josh Allen has been amazing, but I think it's a combination of passing conditions being better this year in general and his skill level improving. But despite that, I do expect him to finish lower than 9 yards per attempt on the season.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just like insane. So I think that the argument for the Bills defense, first of all, Tennessee, they're running out guys that Tannehill hasn't played with as much. And I don't think that's going to be factored into interception odds very much. But we do know that if the quarterback's not on the same page as the receivers, they could just be in the wrong spot when the ball is thrown. And like that could lead to a pick 6 pretty easily. But I have to admit, this is a game where I'd say the odds of defense breaking out are a little bit less than ideal. But I kind of think I pretty much in any NFL game, it's like you said, where just anything can happen. So I'm just trying to cover a lot of different possibilities. So we got 4 minutes left. Any final thoughts for the folks listening?
Yeah, I would say, I think we talk about this a lot, but I think it's just important to reiterate is focus on what kind of field you're playing against, essentially. Like if you're playing in the largest fields, it does become kind of difficult to get guys like Ferkser and Nick in your lineups because they're going to be so popular and they will lead you to such a chalky build. So focus on what you're doing there. If you're playing in a single entry, with a few hundred or a few thousand people, yeah, I'm fine just like playing the good plays essentially. Maybe make a pivot or two or play the good plays in like a specific stack potentially, go good players, but then maybe mix it up with go a little Titans heavy and then play, Anthony Ferkser or whatever. So focus on what kind of field you're playing against. If you're playing for you have to get first or you're really losing EV or you have to solo get first, especially in fields with 50, 100,000 people, yeah, maybe make some weird plays. Get off the board. Don't just jam in the best plays because although they are going to hit at a high rate, I think even the slate that Tyler Johnson we talked about earlier, I think even that slate where he absolutely obliterated his projection, like he scored like a ton of points. But Jimmy Graham ended up being the optimal captain over him. And I think we talked about it for the slate too, is that like, even if this guy does end up hitting, there's a chance that a few thousand more and a bit of a different build does end up being the better play. And I think that's because Jimmy Graham scored a touchdown on that slate. So it is interesting to note that potentially just if the salary doesn't demand that you get all of the studs and then the cheap guy, there's going to be a line of lineups that are dead because they went with that build so much.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because like each different group of players like builds so differently. Like I'm sure the pros are going to jam in Anthony Ferkser and Nick Westbrook and then like have totally like stacked builds at the top of the lineup. Whereas a casual player is going to look at Nick Westbrook and see 0 next to his name and not even really know he exists. So it's like, yeah, I think like the lineup construction is really interesting how you go about it. Like I know a lot of people like leaving money on the table. I think that can be an even better option if you take a Nick Westbrook or Anthony Ferkser, because the reason why people are usually picking that $200 guy is because that's all they got the money for. But if you pick that guy and you have money left over to upgrade, that means your lineup's going to be a lot less like desirable. You do need an outlier performance instead of just like the top guys carrying your lineup. But I think that is an interesting way to build some lineups for some of the really top heavy tournaments. But then for the smaller tournaments, focusing on just like the correlations, getting those right, making sure if you got, several players from a team, maybe you get the quarterback in the flex. If you have the quarterback at captain, then you need like the right players in the flex. Just like making sure you have lineups that have a likely path to victory, because I don't know how many people are really adjusting their lineups based on these advanced criteria that, if we're going in Fantasy Cruncher and setting all our groups, we might do. So they're just kind of like picking 6 players. They're like, I like these 6, and they might miss out on the fact that like they have no path to victory, because if Stefan Diggs and Cole Beasley are in the winning lineup, then Josh Allen probably will be too. So I think it's a really fun format. I've been seeing some talk about single game on FanDuel being hard to beat or something or it's like a rake trap. I actually think like, man, I see like, I don't know if I'm just being biased, but it seems like there's huge advantage in just picking the right captains, like getting the right lineup construction. So it's kind of how I'm feeling. Any final thoughts? Looks like we just locked for tonight's slate.
Yeah, no, I just like what you said about maybe if you are going to play Ferks or whatever, it wouldn't be insane to see like Tyler Croft score the touchdown and outscore Cole Beasley, or or like Gabriel Davis have a long catch and outscore Devin Singletary. But most of the people who are playing Anthony Ferkser are just going to jam in the good plays. So I think, it's locked now, so what does it even matter? But going forward, if we do have slates with really obvious cheap plays, definitely a way in the, these crazy first place tournaments, a way to get different is to leave a lot on the table, and you can still play most of the good plays at that point too.
Yeah. It's always a fun strategy to try to come up with a lineup where everyone has upside, but you have a bunch of money left on the table, so it's always fun. Another one that came to me is like maybe Durianton Evans. Like you play him at captain and just hope Derrick Henry gets hurt or something, because like he'll be like 0.1% owned. I don't actually have any lineups like that, but like being creative like that can really pay off in Showdown. So All right, guys. Hopefully we get a great game. And then we got the Bachelorette following NFL tonight. So make sure to jump in the FanDuel Bachelorette contest. But yeah. Thank you, No House Advantage, for sponsoring the show. Make sure to check them out. Promo code Awesemo, $20 free on your first deposit. They're all about prop betting. So if you want to get practice prop betting and play against weaker competition in the sports book, go to No House Advantage. Kyle, thanks a lot. And thanks, Jordan, behind the scenes producing our show. So, all right, guys, hopefully we get a good game. Good luck tonight, and hopefully we get a several $100,000 takedown from one of you guys.